Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Our sincere apologies for the delay in starting the program. As I was mentioning, we had to manage a small disaster, the stage setting which was not working for some reasons. Thank you so much for your patience. May I now invite the guests for the day, Chief Guest, Mr. Dr. V. Thiruppugazh, IAS retired, former Additional Secretary, National Disaster Management Authority, sir. Dr. Nambi Appadurai, Mr. T.R. Kesavan, President, Madras Chamber, and Mr. Venkatachalam, Advisor, MCCI Sustainable Chennai Forum. This Urban Thinkers Campus is organized with MCCA as a partner organization of UN Habitat under the World Urban Campaign on a very apt title today on building a resilient, low carbon and vibrant Chennai. So we have a lot to discuss. You would have seen the program schedule. We have a heavy list of speakers and schedule for today and for tomorrow. And as you all know, the UN Habitat, which is the Human Settlements Program, is mandated by the UN General Assembly to promote socially and environmentally sustainable towns and cities. UN Habitat is the focal point for urbanization and human settlement matters within the UN system, and their mission embodies four main roles which can be summarized as think, do, share, and partner. That is what these urban thinkers campaigns attempt to do. And Madras Chamber has been partnering for the 7th year under the UN Habitat banner with the NIUA and Environment Management Connect organization and organizing this conference today. So I would request Mr. T.R. Kesavan to give the formal welcome note, and before that let me request all of you to put your mobile phones on silent mode. Mr. Kesavan.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Actually, it gives me a great pleasure to welcome you all for this two-day conference on the building resilient, low carbon and vibrant Chennai. I think after what you have gone through, I think resilient, vibrant Chennai, I think is more important for me today. The low carbon will come. Under the UN Habitat Urban Thinkers Campus organized by the Sustainable Forum Chennai of the Madras Chamber of Commerce, I welcome the guests of the inaugural session, Dr. V. Thiruppugazh Ph.D., IAS retired, former Additional Secretary, National Disaster Management Authority, Government of India. Welcome, sir. Dr. A. Nambi Appadurai, Director, Climate Resilience Practice, World Resource Institute, WRI, India. Mr. Venkatachalam, our own member and the chairman, and for the various technical sessions and the expert speakers. See, before we start, we always give a little bit of what the Madras Chamber of Commerce is, and I am very happy to say that Madras Chamber of Commerce, are known as MCCI. It has been established in 1836, and we are running the 188th year of service of trade to industry and commerce. In the 175th year, the Sustainable Chennai Forum was launched on the 9th of November 2011 on the occasion of the World Habitat Day celebrations. The aim of this forum is to be the leading advocate on sustainable development and create business care of sustainability to make Chennai an inclusive, sustainable, clean, and in this forum, we focus on areas like energy, water, waste management, transport, and urban greening. One of the main focus areas is to make Chennai a lovable and livable city. Little bit about the UN Habitat and the UTC. The Chamber, through its Sustainable Chennai Forum, became an associate partner of the UN Habitat World Urban Campaign in the year 2017. I suddenly realized that I think I also became a director UNAHA in the Habitat Partner and Affordable Housing in 2015. I somehow missed this. So I just added it for that purpose. And the World Urban Campaign is an advocacy and partnership platform to raise the awareness about positive urban change in order to achieve green, productive, safe, healthy, and inclusive and well-planned cities. The World Urban Campaign conceived an open space for exchange of ideas for the urban stakeholders called the Urban Thinkers Campus. The changer was instrumental in bringing Urban Thinkers Campus for the first time to Chennai and joining hands with the UN Habitat as an associate partner organized the conference Chennai as a Global City in 2017, followed by the conferences every year on the theme of World Urban Campaign. Our recommendations and suggestions that are arisen in these detailed conferences have been shared with the government for necessary action. Let me come to today's theme. The underlying theme of this year has been the city we need now, which is part of the World Urban Campaign, and all activities and communication will be around improving cities like ours, which I think we have little to say how important it is considering the kind of natural and probably man-made disasters that we have been seeing time and again in a city like ours. Hence, the topic chosen for this year by the Chamber is Building a Resilient, Low Carbon and Vibrant Chennai. The conference would spread across 1.5 days on the 15th of 16th December 2023, and it coincides with the 12th anniversary of the Sustainable Forum. I've been discussing with some of the experts, and we had the pleasure of having a little bit chat before this. And I think I'm not going to talk anything about the sustainable development, urban, etc., because I think we have the expert sitting here who will be able to talk to us much more about everything. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the entire nature and disaster put together. There are 2 points I really want to highlight is, I don't know how many of people follow the quantum theory. The quantum theory actually starts about the granularity and the interdeterminality and the relationality of particles. One of the most important things that's said is, when the universe got formed, when places like Earth got formed, it actually came to a state of stability. And what the relationality and the interdependability says that any small change that happens can completely affect the balance. And I get a feeling that what we today see in this world, at every point of time, we may call it different names. We can call it that problem of carbon, we may call it because that we are not utilizing the natural resource the right way. But end of the day, this actually forms, I'm really going back to the old theory, which again is becoming extreme popularity, that it is very, very difficult to disturb the nature's settlement process, and it has already settled. And any changes that you do is going to be extremely unpredictable. That is what the theory of interdeterminality talks about. And very interestingly, they said that past cannot predict the future. And I think more and more we have been seeing this. We have experienced how past went, and most of the stuff what is happening in the future, you will find it is completely not related to the past, but not really in the sense they said that is where the problem of probabilities comes in a huge play. And if people who understand the quantum mechanics, people who understand the quantum theory, will probably tend to understand it much more. I think when I really link this to even our own ways of talking about our own literature in the past, and every time they say that God comes when there is a problem, but I think no higher power came when there was individually a bad person, but a higher power came and completely changed it when the entire society was put to risk. And I think that is what we call as the natural balance. And my worry, and I think definitely the worry of a lot of the new urban people, the urban thinkers, and also the carbon secretion, and what is happening in the world is, we are probably going to create a world that's going to be completely unbalanced. And when you create the unbalance, the problem, you won't be able to hold it back. And I don't think people, there's a lot of understanding, but the lot of understanding what we people talk about is still only the tip of the understanding. I don't think many of them are really gone into understand what can be the catastrophic effect. And that is a worry I think all of us are having. And I'm extremely happy that we are thinking about it. We are trying to look at how things can change. And we need a holistic development. I think that's what he has been talking about. Somebody who we can think through and say, it's not that I'm trying to solve one problem, and that problem I won't be able to, solution is not solving that problem. The solution is, how do I avoid the problem, first of all. I mean, mitigation is because you created a problem. How do I not create a problem so that I don't mitigate it? Or so, how do I plan it so well that whenever I take an action, I am by and large not disturbing nature? I think end game is that. By and large, not disturbing nature. I think that is exactly what I will be surprised. I think that's what exactly quantum theory also states. I don't know how many people realize that they say that what you see in an electron is what makes the electron happen. If you don't see an electron, the electron doesn't exist. It's very simple to say. What it actually means is everything is relative. When you have a relative problem, you can create a positive thing or a problem can create a negative thing. Let me stop here because that is the only topic I know to talk. The rest of them, they know to talk. But I thought I'll just put in a thought process saying that if God has settled the nature well and it has been preserved well, what is that we need to do so that we can keep it well rather than trying to disturb it? Thank you and over to you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Nature has everything for man's needs, but not for man's greeds, is what he says. And he talked about the butterfly effect and also the natural balance, and prevention is better than cure. We will discuss more on it as we go along. We would now like to welcome our guest presenting a small plant. Can I get the plants, please? Yeah. Green symbolizes growth, harmony, peace, everything. And that is what we need in the city we need today. Can I request Mr. T.R. Kesavan to present a plant to our guests for the day, to Dr. Thiruppugazh and to Dr. Nambi. Mr. Janagaraj can come to the front. You can come and sit in the front. You can come to the front, Mr. Janagaraj. NIUA has been the knowledge partner ever since we brought the Urban Thinkers Campus to Chennai, from the first one in 2017 till date, and they have been participating, whether it had been virtual or physically held. But now they couldn't join since most of the team members have just returned from COP. So I'm happy to share a small video sent by Director NIUA, Professor Debolina Kuntu. Can we have it, please?
Nonetheless, I am grateful to Madras Chamber of Commerce and Industry for requesting my virtual presence through this short video message. I bring you greetings from the National Institute of Urban Affairs. For those of you who are not aware, the National Institute of Urban Affairs is a think tank of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, Government of India. Our mandate is to help Indian cities move up the development ladder in a sustainable manner by equipping them with policy and research inputs, relevant tools, frameworks, guidelines, knowledge, and capacity. One of the core areas we have been working in the last few years is climate action and resilience in cities, which is very closely related to the theme of this conference. And the reason for this is something which is known to all of us. There is overwhelming evidence that Indian cities are highly vulnerable to the impact of climate change. Addressing the threat of climate change and achieving urban resilience is therefore one of the top priorities of Indian cities today. This year at COP28, a joint outcome statement on urbanization and climate change was announced. The statement sets out a 10-point plan to boost the inclusion of cities in the decision-making process on climate change, drive multi-level climate action, and accelerate the deployment of urban climate finance so that cities are prepared and supported to respond to climate crisis. COP28 also saw the launch of the India-led Global River Cities Alliance. NIUA helped conceptualize this alliance, and will serve as the Secretariat of the Alliance along with the National Mission for Clean Ganga. The purpose of the Alliance is to serve as a platform for exchange of knowledge and good practices for river management, which can be replicated from one part of the world to another. The premise is that healthy rivers are vital for overall urban resilience. Even within the country, NIUA is supporting various cities like the cities of Leh, Pune, Junagadh and Jamnagar in preparing their climate action plans. While the work is still in progress, there are several insights that we have gained, which I would like to share with you. First, it is important to understand that climate actions are not standalone initiatives. In fact, several of these actions are deeply connected to regular activities that ULB does. Second, climate action and urban planning are deeply interlinked. And finally, climate action is everyone's business. Far too often, we tend to undermine the role of communities and general citizens in the resilience story. It is increasingly becoming evident that without support of general citizens, none of the larger missions, plans, or policies for achieving urban resilience will succeed. It is important for us to adopt an inclusive approach to co-design solutions of climate change to achieve ownership of actions. Only then we will be able to achieve our mission of leaving no one behind. With this, I conclude my remarks. I wish you all a productive conference. I look forward to reading a report of the proceedings in the due course. Thank you for your kind attention.
Yeah, that's the message from Professor Debolina Kuntu. She had been kind enough to send that, and we always value the association we have with NIUA. As she mentioned, the Conference of the Parties, the COP28, just concluded a few days ago with a catchy phrase, the beginning of the end of the fossil fuel. And our UTC topic of this nature has a lot of relevance to COP28, its deliberations and the impact on the country as well as on cities like Chennai. So we have here an expert who had just landed. Probably had our program had been one day earlier, we would have got him straight from the airport. So Dr. Nambi Appadurai is here. He had attended the whole COP28. So we thought it would be good to have him to share a sort of first-hand information of what was deliberated and what is his views, especially in the context of the conference today. Let me quickly introduce him to this audience. He is the director of the Climate Resilience Practice at World Resources Institute, India, WRI, where he oversees a portfolio of projects that help build climate resilience at different levels. Dr. Nambi has more than 2 decades of extensive experience in research, project management, and implementation of community-based adaptation projects across Asia and Africa. His international experience includes stints with the World Bank, ADB, UNEP, CGIAR, Millennium Ecosystem Assessment Program, and Mr. M.S. Swaminathan Research Foundation, primarily working on climate, biodiversity conservation, natural resources management, and governance issues. In the past, he served as a member of the Indian delegation to UNFCCC, Conference of Parties meetings, and several expert committees set up by Government of India. He has published widely on topics related to environment, climate change, and development on various peer-reviewed journals. He pursued his doctoral degree from Maxwell School, Syracuse University in interdisciplinary social science, and holds 2 postgraduate degrees, one in development studies from Cambridge University and another public management and a BS in physics from the University of Madras. I would now have great pleasure in inviting Dr. Nambi Appadurai here.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. It's a very timely kind of a moment to hold this meeting. Year after year, we witness this, which has become more frequent and intense today, the floods and what we witness in the city. So I think these kind of workshops not only reminds us of that and also help us to kind of organize and come together to find solutions for these problems. So it's important that the timing is really good. Thank you for the invite. So I'm here to kind of provide you a short synopsis of what happened in COP. This was my 14th COP. I've been one of the persons who's been attending regularly. I don't know what we have achieved out of it. That's a different question altogether. But nevertheless, these meetings are important, but it is a very slow, the progress is very slow in these meetings, but that's how the UN meetings are. But nevertheless, these are important gatherings to kind of, come out with some international solutions and to find some ways to kind of, deal with this monstrous problem of climate change. I'll just, quickly take about 10 minutes to kind of provide you a snapshot of what the decisions are, why it matters, and how the deliberations went to arrive at these decisions. So, this is held, as you all know, it is held in Dubai. This is a first ever time it happened in Dubai. And it is the 28th in the series of, COP meetings what we had so far. I still, in 1985, the first COP was about 4,000 people attended, and see the kind of a number of people who registered for this. This is official delegation accounts about 97,000 people, and almost a lakh. We hit the number of 1 lakh. This has become an annual mela as well. Like this Sabarimala season, people who've been really concerned about the issues are there. Nevertheless, I don't want to discount their, the interest in this thing. But again, it has become an affair, and it's a kind of a fad to say that I've been part of COP. That's how it is. See the kind of a carbon footprint it leaves. That's the way it is. Everybody has aspirations and they want to be part of this big event. So about 20,000 non-registered people were also from about 200 countries participated. 154 heads of state participated in this, and out of which about only 15 female leaders were there. The focus of this particular COP is on fast-tracking the transition to low-carbon world. I'll come back to that, the decisions made under these headings. Agenda is about global stock taking, and then the loss and damage, which is one of the big ticket item for this COP28. And then fixing the climate finance and global goal and adaptation, which has been talked about for about 7-8 years now. So it has seen some forward momentum. And just transition and inclusivity has become the jargon today, when we talk about renewables and stuff. So that is also one of the important areas this COP has covered. The major outcome is attributed to kind of the loss and damage discussions what we had. The momentum and the background was laid in last year in COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, but it had really gained a lot of momentum. And interestingly, the very first day, never in the COP history has happened that this kind of announcement came in the very first day. And they normally wait till the end of the deliberations when the high-level segment happens to announce these sort of things. But then, the UAE want to do it differently, so that the first day itself there is a kind of a momentum for this whole process, and there is a very positive note they started in providing the funding for the LND. LND, as you know, it's mostly is about now the countries, despite having the wherewithals to do the adaptation, still they cannot manage to kind of find solutions, and they're time and again they've been affected by the storms and the natural calamities. So some people do have the capacities and resources are there, but they cannot access it. So those kind of, particularly the small island countries and the LDCs, the least developing countries, are bearing the brunt of it. They've been the voice of the LND for so many years. It saw the light of it. In Sharm el-Sheikh, we did see something happening, and then the transition committee was set up, but then they gave life to this whole process in this COP. That's why it's become a very important issue. And about $770 million, $6 million of contributions came up. This is nothing, as I mentioned here. It's even less than 2% of required amount. Now we talk about endangered species, the flora and fauna, but there are endangered islands today. There are living witnesses, and those people are very vociferous because it affects directly their lives and livelihoods. Every person is affected in many ways. Now, what we have witnessed in Chennai is no mean. Certainly, this is also an important thing to be considered. The time will come. We will also be claiming the L&D funds. Definitely, that's the way we are moving in. So, there are lots of momentum there, and unfortunately, the contributions from US, which is the biggest emitter, is about 17 million or something, which is peanuts compared to what has been. Again, it is just 770 million, but still something is there on paper at least. The World Bank will be managing this fund, and there is a mechanism which has been evolved to administer this fund. So that's one of the biggest takeaway, and lots of celebrations about it, because it is the voice of the people which has been heard after a prolonged battle of about 20 odd years. And then the climate finance is another thing, which is a dampener. It is really $100 billion, which was committed 7 years back. We have not seen the light of it at all. There is a very slow progress. It's a very unkept promises by the developed countries. It is all between the haves and have-nots, as you know. It is about the developed versus developed countries. The debate is ever-ending. And COP28 saw an agreement to draft a post-2025 finance target ahead of COP29. So that is, these are, maybe it doesn't mean anything on paper, but still it has some certain significance, but COP decisions are like that. It takes several years to kind of arrive at certain things. There should be a constant momentum, there should be a constant progress to arrive at something like what happened in Paris. It took so many years, about 20 odd COPs to kind of get to that stage. So that's how the UN functions, UN system functions. So for instance, financing for climate adaptation, a key part of climate finance dropped by 14% in 2021. What we talk about, the $100 billion, out of which 14%, it was less than what was expected in 2021. Then in 2022, there was some momentum again because of the kind of criticism they faced, the developed countries faced. Again, so 133.6 million was announced towards the adaptation fund at COP28, but that wasn't, not even cover the 14% drop what we saw in 2021. Again, there are some forward momentum in terms of US commitment of $3 billion to the Green Climate Fund. Again, it was supposed to be spent on 50% adaptation, 50% mitigation, but never. Adaptation always gets a lower treatment. It doesn't really get the money what it deserves. Mitigation is far more, in that sense, very contextually very powerful kind of a approach what people take to. And of course, even with this 3 billion, 1 billion is committed long back, which has not been paid. So literally it is only 2 billion. So yeah, I don't want to get into the details of it, but certainly there is some forward momentum, but then it's not enough. And global goal and adaptation, this is another important stuff which has been talked about. As you know, adaptation is always considered to be a second cousin of mitigation, because it is something to do with the developing countries, small island countries, people, the poor, are left to defend themselves to adapt to the situation of climate change. So the final text calls for a doubling in adaptation finance and plans for assessment and monitoring of adaptation needs. So unless we know what we ask, the cost of adaptation is very difficult to kind of factor in, because it has several elements. There is a there are non-economic losses as well. Particularly in the loss and damage, that's an important thing. What we see as the physical stuff is easy to kind of quantify, whereas the loss of lives and heritage sites and stuff, the cultural values cannot be really put a number to that. You can't put a number to that. So these are some of the sticking points within the adaptation discussions. And discussions are focused on CBDR, that's common but differentiated responsibilities, which India was the torchbearer of that during the early years of COP discussions and negotiations, because there are the kind of developed countries and versus developing countries. There are certain common differentiated responsibilities, and capabilities are so different. So we cannot start at the same plane. That's the kind of an argument what they had, and it holds still some water in the discussions. And an explicit 2030 date has been integrated into the text for targets, and this time particularly water security, ecosystem restoration, health were given lots of importance, and they also discussed about the mechanisms by which adaptation measures could be taken in these particular sectors. Again, there is no financial targets have been fixed. There's, according to the recent report of UNEP, about $400 billion are required per year to deal with adaptation. I'm sorry. Yeah, next one. Very sorry. Yeah. I'm so sorry. But this is what I talked about, and then we'll come to the next important issue of global stock take. Every 5 years, we agreed in Paris that we'll come back together to understand where the countries stay. They made some commitments under the nationally determined contributions in Paris. All the 195 signatories have made some commitments, mostly back of the envelope calculates. They've not done a serious job to kind of come out with the real figures, but nevertheless it's important. There is some sort of a ballpark figures. to understand this. They also agreed to come back and see the progress of it, how every country has fared versus the commitment what they made. So this is a global stock taking. It is supposed to have happened last year before last, because of COVID. This didn't happen. So this is the official kind of a platform where they discussed this. Lots of attention was there. In this, time was devoted to this global stock take. So this is one of the texts which has been discussed at length in this particular COP, because this sets the tone for the attainment of the agreement what we had in Paris, particularly. So the projection of peak global emissions between the final text mentions the projection of peak global emissions between 2025, and hopefully if we go at that rate and see whatever we committed to is kind of attended to, then we are reaching net zero by 2050 is a possibility, but that is made very explicit. But again, there are lots of sticking points, because committed, on the whole, countries were failing far short of their own collective climate goals which they committed in Paris. With various reasons, COVID is supposed to be one of the reasons. They also kind of, because all the resources have to be diverted. There are several excuses, there are no dearth of excuses. The stock take also calls for countries to contribute to the global tripling of renewable energy. I'll come back to that point a little later. So these are some of the important highlights. And another one is the UAE consensus on fossil fuels. This is, people go gung-ho about it. But this is something, when you talk about it, when you see, there's nothing great about it, but still, it holds a very significant point, because the people are stuck on the language, particularly in UN negotiations. The language matters so much. They have to have a compromise on the kind of language what they use. They kind of debate, because it has to go through several processes. People who've been involved in the negotiations know about it, because there are different kind of constituents like BRIC, G77, G20. So people have to kind of, address this, have a consensus within those kind of, bodies first before you go to the plenary. So it takes a long, long time to go there. There are two things which have been talked about in the past couple of COPs, that phase out and phase down. These languages really, appear so simple, but people, there are for and against this stuff. The oil-producing countries don't want to go into a complete phase out, because they were very clear. This COP being held in an oil-producing country, they've never budged a bit on that. Particularly Saudi Arabia. So lots of time has been spent, a couple of years, on this phase out and phase down. Then they came out with a very consensuous language this time. It is more to do with the transition away, the language what they used now, and the celebrated language today is the transition away from fossil fuels in energy systems. It is very, it's regrettable that, you don't see the language fossil fuel so far in the text. That is really, ironical to say. We cannot even think about it. This is all about fossil fuels, but this never had a place in the text so far. So for people, this might not be an appealing one, but still, that is how it operates, the UN operates. So transition away from fossil fuels in a just, orderly, and equitable manner, accelerating action in this critical decade, because that's a kind of a language they came out. Again, we have to unpack each of those things. Just, orderly, what does it mean? Equitable. So there is a lot of work to be done. A couple of slides more. And the next one, it's about the renewables pledge. Interestingly, people kind of, the global target to triple installed capacity to at least 11 tegawatts have been agreed to, and tetrawatts have been agreed to by 2030. And how feasible it is a different question, but at least it is in theory. People came together and agreed. About 100 countries, 16 countries have signed to this. India and China obviously stepped out of it for various reasons. They're not part of it because they think they've accomplished so much in this front. And then it also sets a target to double the rate of global energy efficiency improvements from roughly 2% to 4% per year. There's another important thing which came out of the renewables pledge. Then other key declarations. There are no dearth of declarations in every COP. Whether it sees the light or whether it's how implementable, it's a different question. At least the intent has to be expressed in COPs. And time and again it happens. One of the important things that happened is, again, agriculture has never been part of the mainstream of things within the COP system for a long, long time. Though people from the rural background and the rural activists, rural development workers have been really pushing this agenda for a longer time. It also saw some light here. with the food systems transformation, call to action for food systems transformation was there, and they also kind of worked on some of the details of that and how to kind of implement what are the kind of priority areas within the food systems. But that has gained a lot of attention. Again, it also attracted some funds, the commitment about $890 million to the research consortium CGIAR, which is the primary body of research for agriculture internationally, and $57 million of Bezos Earth Fund, and about $47 million of commitment from Norway came up. So yeah, that is again, just transition, another thing which has been talked about a lot, because what is just differs for people who've been looking at from what kind of lens we look at. So particularly when the transition from the fossil fuel energy to the renewables happens, there are lots of things which will go with that. People have to be upskilled, they should be skilled. There are several things which are going to happen. There is a fear that people will be left behind. So it's important to address those issues, when they're doing this transition, what kind of help and support they have to be given. And it should be also equitable. That's another question. And Marine Climate Partnership was also launched, and UAE took the leadership, and then they really came out and announced some certain modalities to kind of make it operationalize. And we know the importance of this country knows, particularly we live in a coastal area, we know the importance of it, how important to kind of because coastal protection is. So yeah, in summary, this is my last slide. COP28 reached a landmark agreements on loss and damage and clear ambitions to transition away from fossil fuels. These are the two key takeaways from COP. The other things are there, also ran kind of the stuff, which needs to kind of really push, the agenda has to be pushed in several fronts, and we have to unpack many of the things which has been declared there. But these are two, they kind of tout this as the biggest achievements, what the COP28 has done. And very little progress on climate finance front, which I explained earlier. And a first of its kind fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty was proposed and signed by the oil producing country, Colombia. It's a very, very interesting kind of a mooted idea, but we'll see how far it takes us. And there were some giant leaps are needed, given the urgency of the situation, and these incremental steps are not enough to accomplish the Paris goal. It's still a long way ahead. And there's a wonderful quote from one of the my friends and colleague from Samoa. The course correction that is needed has not been secured. It is a litany of loopholes. I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Nambi Appadurai, for that helicopter view of the COP28. As he says, the intents are there, implementations are slow, and we may have to wait for some more time. And probably it may require a detailed discussion on one of the Sustainable Chennai Forum dialogue. We can get into that. Thank you so much. The highlight of today's event is the presence of Dr. V. Thiruppugazh IAS. When we decided on the UTC much before, and when we started sending out our reminders after the floods, people started asking, is it the right time to talk about resilience, vibrance, etc. But we strongly felt probably this is the time, because when the memories are fresh and when the impacts are very harshly felt, probably this is the time we also will be in a mood to discuss it more seriously. And immediately we could think of the one and only person is Dr. V. Thiruppugazh. In fact, I don't know whether I should mention that or not. After 2015 floods, we had a session with him on a different thing under the Sustainable Chennai Forum in 2016. But I was hesitant to mention, people shouldn't think whenever we organize, we announce such conferences, you get floods. Not like that. But we had some discussion, but now probably it's more important to take stock of things. We have a lot of sessions, Dr. Janakaraj and others are there to dive into that deeply. And for the time being, we will be happy to know about the disaster management practices and the whole wealth of knowledge he is bringing to the table. Let me briefly introduce him to this audience. He is the Indian Administrative Service Officer in the rank of Additional Secretary to Government of India. After joining the civil service in 1991, he served in various district assignments as Assistant Collector, District Development Officer, and District Collector before he was posted as Joint Chief Executive Officer of the Gujarat State Disaster Management Authority. In addition to his contribution in Gujarat earthquake, reconstruction and disaster management initiatives in Gujarat as Joint CEO additional CEO and CEO of the GSDMA. He held several senior positions such as the Commissioner and Secretary of Rural Development, Commissioner of Information and Secretary to the Chief Minister in Government of Gujarat. He also served as Senior Advisor, Nepal Planning Commission and Senior Advisor, Nepal National Reconstruction Authority following the massive 2015 earthquake that happened in Nepal. In Government of India, he served as Advisor, Policy and Planning in the National Disaster Management Authority, New Delhi. It was in that capacity he addressed us in 2016. He was instrumental in preparing the first ever National Disaster Management Plan. He played a key role in the preparation of several national guidelines such as guidelines on minimum standards of relief, guidelines on preparation of heat wave action plan, guidelines on management of thunderstorm and lightning, national guidelines for preparation of action plan for cold wave. He has not spared any area, I would say. Disability, inclusive disaster management and temporary shelters, to name a few. He has authored many book chapters and journal articles related to disaster management. He received his PhD in disaster management from the Australian National University, Canberra. Currently, he is the chairman of the Advisory Committee for Mitigation and Management of Floods in Chennai Metro. I am sure you will all agree that we cannot have a better person to give the keynote address today. May I invite Dr. Thiruppugazh IAS to make his presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome him with a warm applause.
The world teacher and philosopher J. Krishnamurti once famously said that if you love your children, there would not be any wars. Had he spoken about disasters instead of wars, he would have said the same thing. If you love your children, there would not be any disasters. If we love our children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren, we would not allow them to be drowned in floods, to be buried under debris, or burnt or roasted alive in chemical and industrial fires. But human beings have the tendency to discount future. Hence the need for frameworks, hence the need for organizing seminars, workshops and discussions to understand prevention and mitigation. See, if you look at this slide, if you look at the total number of occurrences of disasters in the world, USA tops the list, followed by China. Somewhere among the top 10 countries, you will find India also. If you look at the total number of lives lost, among the top 10, you will not find USA. So the total number of lives lost is not related to the total number of occurrences. In this slide, you will find the total economic loss. Again, you find USA topping the list. Somewhere India is also there among the top 10. So all over the world, even in developed countries, though they have been able to reduce the loss of lives, they have not been able to reduce economic losses. We have to understand that. This problem is not only special to India, it is a global problem. You look at Japan, you look at China, you look at USA, economic losses are much more, even though life losses are less. If you analyze the global trend of natural disasters over a period of 180 years, I have to say that this is a slide I have taken from EMDAT. I don't agree with the use of the word natural there. So I will explain why later. If you look at the trend of disasters, you find that disasters are increasing. When compared with 1900, the number of occurrences are increasing. If you look at the granular data, you can see that there is a difference. Hydrometeorological disasters are on the rise, whereas geophysical events have not increased to such an extent. Geophysical events like earthquakes and landslides, whereas cyclones, heavy rains and floods and extreme events have increased. If you look at the total lives lost and compare it with the economic loss, at the global level, we have been able to reduce the loss of lives a great deal. But economic losses are mounting, economic losses are increasing. What does it show? It shows that we have been able to rescue lives, we have improved our early warning search and rescue capacities, but we have not taken adequate prevention and mitigation measures. So the question is it possible to prevent or mitigate disasters? That is the biggest question. Here, I am going to talk about some fundamentals and basic principles. I am not going to talk about techniques and technologies and methods. They keep changing, but the fundamental principles are eternal. Unless we understand the fundamental principles, we will not be able to apply our techniques and methods. So I will focus on the basic principles of risk reduction. First of all, we all have a blueprint for inaction at the individual level, at the household level, society level, community level, and at the government level. We all have a blueprint for inaction when it comes to natural disasters or natural hazards. What is it? First of all, make the problem a natural event. Say that it is a natural disaster. It is a natural event. So what can we do? Often I see political leaders, even bureaucrats, people who are in the field of disaster management saying that natural disasters cannot be avoided or prevented. At the most, we can save lives or provide relief. So the easiest thing is blame it on nature, make the problem a natural event. Second is make the problem which cannot be avoided. How can you avoid floods? How can you avoid earthquakes? So what can we do about it? Third is make the solution seem expensive. It's very costly. How can we afford to do that? But if you look at the quantum of relief we give after the occurrence of the disasters, if the same money would have been spent before the occurrence of the disaster, we would have saved so much of economic loss. Then make it an all or none issue. I will give an example. In Delhi, if 80% of the buildings, Delhi is situated in zone 4 for earthquake vulnerability. If 80% of the buildings are non-code compliance buildings, so what we say is 80% of the millions of buildings are not complying with the seismic codes. How can we make all of them safe? So what do? You do nothing. Make it an all or none issue. But if we can prioritize our interventions, select 20% of the buildings where public good is involved, we can reduce 80% of the losses. That we don't do. We make it an all or none issue. Make it an issue where only a policy or act only can be useful. So what we say is, no, the existing policy is not good. We start preparing new policies. Existing act is insufficient. Bring out a stringent act. Then wait for perfection. So we keep on studying the problem. We keep on studying the problems. You would have seen in some of the universities, I have seen, some students will continue to study there forever at the age of 40, 50. They would never come out of the campus to face life. So we keep on studying the problem. And then, this is the worst of all, say that we have already done it. This is my experience. As advisor in the National Disaster Management Authority, as advisor to many countries with regard to disaster management, whenever I go and tell people this is what we should do, the first response would be that we have already done it. We've already done it. That is worse than a disaster, actually. So if you want to solve a problem, as Thiruvalluvar says, Noi Nadi, Noi Mudal Nadi, Adu Thanikum Vaipachayal என்று சொல்லுகிறார் Thiruvalluvar. So unless you study the problem, understand the root cause of the problem, we will not be able to give solutions. But most of the time, we are treating the symptoms, we are not treating the root causes. Where do we take the first step? The first step is understanding what a disaster is. Since we use this word disaster, since you hear it in the television, read it in the newspaper, all of you will have the feeling that we know what a disaster is. But do we all know what a real disaster is? Much action depends on how we define what a disaster is. How this concept of disaster has evolved over a period of time. First, human beings thought that disasters are acts of God. Even today in USA, they use the word act of God. God is punishing the human beings for their sins. Even in 1934, when Nepal, Bihar earthquake occurred, Mahatma Gandhi said that it is a punishment given by God for human sins. Every religion has such stories. But in 17th century and 18th century, when the age of enlightenment dawned in Europe, after the Lisbon earthquake in 1755, philosophers like Rousseau and Voltaire questioned this concept of God punishing people. Then, when science also improved, people started understanding that it is not God giving punishments to the human beings. Then they changed the concept. They said, notion of an external agent in the form of a natural event is creating the disasters. It may be geophysical events like earthquakes and landslides, or hydrometeorological events, or biological disasters. So if God is punishing, or if a natural event is occurring, how can you prevent it? You can't do anything. So what we have to do is try to save the lives and provide relief. So we adopted a post-disaster reactive approach. Then when anthropologists started studying disasters, they said it is not nature which is creating the disasters, it is the interface of culture and nature which is creating the disasters. All that we have created, whatever human beings have created, is part of the culture. That is why we say agriculture, horticulture, sericulture, everything is culture. So this interface is creating the problem. Nature alone cannot create problems. Then sociologists started studying disasters. They say that disasters are social constructs. It is not God-sent. It is not created by nature. It is purely our social structure which is creating the disasters. They say that disasters are social constructs. The notion of social, economic, political, and cultural factors are creating the disasters. This is something we should understand. This is the root cause which I was talking about. Our social structure, the class, caste, race, and gender divisions in the society. Disasters affect different people differentially. A rich man and a poor man are not affected to the same extent in any disaster anywhere in the world. Poor suffer more in all disasters. In a caste-ridden society like India, certain castes, the so-called lower castes, marginalized communities, they are affected more than others. In the Western countries, it is race. They say that African Americans are more affected. Earlier we used to say black people and Negroes, now African Americans. That itself has a racial connotation. The whites in America are not called European Americans. Why should the blacks be called as African Americans? So the racial division is creating problems there. The so-called African Americans are more affected in disasters. In all disasters, all over the world, regardless of the country being rich or poor, it is women who are more affected in all disasters. Then cultural factors creating disasters. I'll give you one example. It's a very sensitive area. I'll give you one example. In the northeastern India, there is a cultural practice called Zoom cultivation. There, they set fire to the forest. Then after the forest burns, they cultivate the land and they do agriculture. Next year, they will go to another area. This is called shifting cultivation or Zoom cultivation. I was reading a report recently. In one of the states in northeast, every year, an area equivalent to Chennai city is destroyed for Zoom cultivation. In addition to this land being destroyed for cultivation, most of the time, this results in forest fire, destroying a huge area adjoining 2-3 states. So it's a cultural practice. It must have been appropriate before 1,000 years or 2,000 years. Is it relevant now? Then the so-called lower castes and poor forced to occupy unsafe places. We see our settlements in the rural areas. How is the settlement arranged? Certain castes will be in the center safe, and certain, as you go to the margin, you will find certain communities occupying the unsafe places. Mettu kudiyinar. We are using that word in Tamil. Mettil irukiravargal, mettu kudiyinar. So, a disaster of the same magnitude impacts different people differentially. This is what we have to understand. And what creates vulnerability? One is the vulnerability of the built environment. We have to understand all the vulnerabilities if you want to make Chennai or any other city disaster resilient. Vulnerability of the built environment, poverty, and I spoke about economic, cultural factors and social factors. I have to talk about economic factors, our mode of production. Profit-driven society, the mode of production only looks at profit, not the damage which we create, and political factors. How political factors create disasters, all of you know much more than me. I need not elaborate on this. Population, economic processes, marginalization, underdevelopment. See, sometimes underdevelopment may create vulnerability. Sometimes overdevelopment, if it is unplanned, it can create vulnerability. And then lack of regulation and enforcement and lack of capacity. All these are. Is there something like a natural disaster? Is there anything like a man-made disasters? There are natural hazards. Earthquakes, flood, heavy rain, cyclones are natural hazards. It is the commissions and omissions done by human beings which convert a hazard into disasters. So there is nothing like a natural disaster. All disasters are man-made disasters. Unless we understand this basically, we will always be blaming nature. The question is how to build a resilient city. Earlier, we used to talk about disaster resilient communities. The original meaning of the word resilience, if you look at the original meaning in the dictionary, it means the ability to bounce back. Now we are using it in a totally different manner. Resilient means not affected by, but that's not the original dictionary meaning. So we spoke about disaster resilient communities, communities which will be able to bounce back in the aftermath of disasters. Then we spoke about disaster resistant communities. Why should they be affected by disasters? Can't they resist disasters? Then we spoke about sustainable hazard mitigation. And finally, we are talking about invulnerable development. That is what we mean by resilience today. Can we develop in such a way we become invulnerable? How do we do it? So far, we have been focusing on relief and saving lives. We have to move towards prevention and mitigation. How do you do that? Sendai framework, which was signed in Japan in 2015 by 187 countries, including India, gives a very good framework for risk mitigation and disaster risk reduction. It gives us 4 priorities. So we have to understand those priorities and act according to those priorities. The first is understanding risk. Unless we understand risk, we will not be able to mitigate it. The second is improving risk governance. Third is investing in risk reduction. It's a very beautiful word. Though we spend money, it is called investment. Why is it called investment? Because if you spend 1 rupee for a disaster risk reduction today, you will be able to save 6 or 7 rupees tomorrow in the form of prevention of loss of lives and economic losses. And lastly, improving early warning, preparedness, and building back better. How do you do that? How do you understand risk? Ours is not a risk-sensitive society. This slide needs no explanation. This is an actual photograph taken in one of the Indian cities. Urban, elite, educated, rural, poor, illiterate, both are risk insensitive. This figure is from 2005 to 2015. In the so-called natural hazards, 27,420 people have lost their lives. But in the corresponding period in road accidents, over nearly 14 lakh people lost their lives 510 times. But we are always worried about loss of lives in natural hazards, but we don't talk about these road accidents. Still, we find people resisting wearing of helmets or wearing seat belts and drunken driving. We are not a risk-sensitive society. We have to understand this. Why are we not risk-sensitive? Because we take everyday risk. This is a photograph taken from one of the cities in India. So if you are not bothered about everyday risk, how are you going to bother about a risk which will become a reality after 50 years or 100 years? I went to Japan after the 1995 Kobe earthquake. In 2001, I went there. So they showed me the railway station and they told me that, look, this railway station, we very efficiently used this place for people to sleep in the aftermath of the disasters. So they expected me to react saying that what a great thing you have done. I said, you come to India, in every railway station, every day you will find thousands of people sleeping. It's an everyday thing for us. So there is nothing astonishing in what you did. So we take everyday risk. How will we be bothered about a risk which will become a reality after 50 years? So we don't think about long-term risk. We discount long-term risk. There is something called objective risk, the way experts understand risk. That is not going to improve disaster management. What is important is we have to improve how people understand risk, subjective risk. Supposing that one takes a journey from Madras Airport to San Francisco, what do you think is the riskiest part of the journey? Which part? Going from here to the airport or flying over oceans and lands for about 7,000-8,000 kilometers, which is the riskiest part of the journey? Which one? Going to the airport. Because the road accidents occur 6,000 times more than air accidents. Plane crashes have become almost zero. But a common man will always think that it is safe to travel by car, but it is unsafe to travel by air. So can we change that perception? Not only that, we desire risk. Sigmund Freud rightly said that there are two forces operating in human beings, eros and thanatos, the will for life and will for death. So this is desired risk. We want river view apartments, lake view apartments. We don't bother about the soil condition over there, liquefaction factor over there. We're not bothered about that. Then risk society. Ulrich Beck clearly says that we have built a risk society. The solutions which we have given for our problems have become more riskier than the earlier problems themselves. In this technologically driven society, technology is creating more and more disasters, so we have created a risk society. Can we really live in a zero-risk world? It is not possible. Descartes famously said that I think, therefore I am. But we have to say that I risk, therefore I am. We have to accept a certain amount of risk. Living is a process of accepting risk. But the question is, what is acceptable risk? All of us know that sugar is not good for health, so we say half sugar. We don't say no sugar. So, can we define what is the acceptable level of risk which we can understand? Zero risk is not possible. Then what is the level of acceptable risk towards which we have to work? How do you do that? We need to have risk assessments. We have to have hazard risk vulnerability assessments properly. Then we have to undertake micronization studies and analysis of the past disasters. Losses have to be done. And finally, we have to take into account the impact of climate change in the future. So all this has to be done to understand the nature of risk. That is understanding risk, the first priority. The second is improving risk governance. How do you improve risk governance? Improve the way our institutions function and improve the instruments we have, if it is really required, the legal and regulatory frameworks, and then provide adequate finance, improve our human resources, and build the capacity of the people involved in disaster risk reduction, at the same time build the capacity of the communities themselves. We have to move from response to resilience. That is the biggest challenge now. If we want to do that, we focus on improving the capacity of the local communities. Improving the capacity at the local level is more important, not at the national level, not at the state level. The primary and first responders are the people themselves. The community is the first responder. So can we improve the capacity of the first responders? We need regulations and enforcement. In many places, we don't have regulations, and wherever there are regulations, there is lack of enforcement. So can we improve our enforcement? The question is, regulations, are there too many or too little? Earlier in the earlier slide, I showed that, see, we always think that a policy or act or amending the act is the solution. I always ask this question. The machinery which is not able to implement a liberal act, how is it going to implement a much more stringent act? So by making the act more stringent, by having more regulatory measures, we are not going to improve the regulation. We have to understand that. I feel that the existing regulations are too many. The problem is with implementation only. It is not the inadequacy of laws, it's a question of lack of implementation. Then all or none approach. I feel Pareto's principle applies to risk also. 80% of the risk is concentrated in 20% of the places. Can we select those 20% of the places and focus on them to reduce risk? whenever there is a major disaster, we think of creating a new institution, an extraordinary mechanism to address that issue. But over the course of time, all these extraordinary mechanisms become ordinary mechanisms because we don't delegate more powers. We don't empower these institutions. The same government staff are deputed, except the name board and the building, nothing is new in this extraordinary mechanism. Can we change this approach? And finally, we should have community-based disaster risk reduction. No government in the world alone will be able to reduce disaster risk. If the risk reduction has to be sustainable, communities have to be involved. The very word sustain, where does it come from? It comes, sub means from below, and tenere means, what I have written? I am not able to read. Hold. So unless something is held from below, it will not be sustainable. So the initiatives should originate from below. It should not come from above. Can people accept schemes and programs and cooperate? That is the benchmark of community-based disaster risk reduction. Finally, improving risk governance means improving ordinary governance, everyday governance. It is not always about crisis. If you don't improve everyday governance, you will not be able to improve disaster risk governance. A person who is not able to walk cannot be expected to sprint. So the best way to improve disaster risk governance is improve everyday governance. How do you do it? Strengthen the state and district level institutions, build local capacities, improve the techno-legal regime, which means focus on implementing the regulations. The third priority is investing in resilience. We have to talk about insurance and risk transfer. The entire risk cannot be absorbed by the government. So we should promote insurance and share the risk. Going beyond sharing it within a district, within a state, within a country, can we think about insurance and reinsurance and share the risk globally? If the risk is shared globally, then it will not be a burden on any government or any individual. Investing in resilience means we have to look beyond the structures. This is very, very important. We always look at structures, building drainage, building a building, creating a dike, creating something. No, we have to look really beyond structures. We have to look at nature-based solutions. We have to improve livelihoods. We have to improve social security. We have to improve access to education and health. We have to improve the human resources, and we have to focus on research and knowledge generation and knowledge sharing. We have to focus on all these things if we want to improve our resilience capacity. We need to improve our response and recovery capacities. If you really want to improve disaster response, there should be coordination among the agencies. This has to be established prior to the occurrence of the disaster, and local response has to be improved. You will be surprised to know countries like Canada and America very clearly say the local communities, the local self-governments cannot expect help from the central authorities before 72 hours. They put it in the policy itself, which means that the local capacity has to be improved and promote voluntarism. In the aftermath of disasters, we see a surge of voluntarism, spontaneous voluntarism, but that sort of untrained spontaneous voluntarism is not going to help. Can we have a cadre of trained volunteers, trained and certified, equipped volunteers, and train the local people, build their capacity? The philosophy should be help yourself. People should be able to help themselves first and help others, and then help others to help themselves. Because continuous help is no help. It is dependency. It's a parasitic relationship. We don't want it. Can people help themselves? Can we aim at that? If we want to do all these things, we have to change our perspective. What is preventing us from doing all these things? The dominant perspective we have. One is we view disasters as isolated events. A disaster occurs, and then after 25 years, another disaster will occur. After 30 years, another disaster will occur. So we think that there is a development process going on, and it is punctured by these disasters. No. It is wrong. We are accumulating risk on an everyday basis. It can cross a threshold and manifest as a disaster at some point of time, but We are accumulating risks, they are not isolated events. We don't analyze risks, vulnerabilities during normal times. Normal times, we are always thinking about development. We always seek solutions in technology. That's how we have created a risk society. Is technology going to solve all the problems? Is more drainage going to solve all the flood problem in Chennai? We have to think about it. See it as a temporary administrative failure. So what do? So we blame a particular political person, or we blame a particular bureaucrat, suspend a couple of people, then we are happy. It is not a temporary administrative problem, it's a whole systemic problem we have to understand. We have developed that way for 100 years or 200 years. As I said earlier, the term natural disaster helps. People are seen only as victims. These top-down policies are there. We don't leverage the strength of the people. No accountability, no transparency, and reactive approach. See, this should be the ideal model. When development is the front wheel, and disaster management should be the back wheel, and they should move together. But really, what really happens is, this is the reality model. So can we change this? That is the question. We should have an alternative perspective. What is the alternative perspective we need? One is, we must understand these disasters are part of our normal development process. Normal, unrisk-informed development process. We should understand that. We have to analyze linkages during normal times. Emphasis on solutions that change the relationship and attitude in the society. So unless you don't bring about a fundamental change in the attitude and relationship within the society, then you will not be able to address the root causes. We should look at people as partners, not as beneficiaries. See, sometimes I wonder why we use this word beneficiary. Somebody is affected by flood, somebody is affected by earthquake, somebody is affected by cyclone. We are giving some assistance, whether assistance is given by government or NGO, we use the word beneficiary. No, they are not beneficiaries. Decentralized institutions and empower them to take decisions, improve our transparency and accountability. We have to more proactive approach. Can we look at crisis as an opportunity for social transformation? This is very important. The Chinese word crisis means disaster as well as an opportunity. Every disaster opens a window of opportunity for addressing a range of things which is normally difficult to address during normal times. So in the aftermath of major disasters, can we use the post-disaster window to bring about a real transformation? If we want to do all this, there is need for mainstreaming. So far we have been approaching disaster management through special projects. This is what is called side streaming. Can we bring it as part of the mainstream development process? Mainstreaming cannot be achieved through conferences and workshops. Our disaster management problem is not a technical problem, nor it is a financial problem. It is a political issue. We have to understand that. Mainstreaming needs political will, enforcement of regulations, allocation of funds, and delegation of powers. So can we go for long-term benefits of risk-sensitive development rather than short-term benefits of risk-prone development? Everything is a trade-off. Are we willing to trade off this short-term benefit of non-risk sensitive planning to long-term development of risk-informed planning? That is the question. So mainstreaming, we have to take mainstreaming very, very seriously. When I talk about mainstreaming, it does not mean that today we can stop all special projects and look at mainstreaming totally. No. If you really want to reduce risk, it has two aspects. One is, we should not allow any new risk to accrue from today. For that, mainstreaming will help. But what about the risk which is already accrued? For that, you have to have special projects to mitigate that risk. So for a long time, for 10 years or 20 years, the special projects and mainstreaming should go hand in hand, like exchanging the baton in a relay race, and then only you can switch over to mainstreaming. So I started with a quote from Krishnamurti. I will end it with a quote from Krishnamurti. J.K. used to say that seeing is acting. If you really see, you will act. There will not be any gap between seeing and acting. If you bring in this time factor, I will see, I will understand, I will act, then you are not going to act. So we are all able to see the risk, how we have developed, and what is the result of this risk for development. Now the question is, can we all act? Thank you very much.
Excellent presentation. Probably sensitizing all of us, and maybe the rest of the conference will start from here and continue the discussion. We will also share the thoughts from the wider group present here. Thank you so very much for being with us today and for your wonderful address with lot of takeaways. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big hand to him once again. I am aware we are running short of time. Can I request Mr. Kesavan to present a memento before I invite Mr. Venkatachalam to propose the vote of thanks? Mr. Kesavan, can we present a memento to both our guests today? This is in addition. We also have got a solar lamp. Solar lamp. Can we get the thing? And sorry, Mr. Kesavan, you may have to do one more job. We are bringing, he had brought light to the audience here, we are giving him a light. And to Dr. Nambi. And our coffee table book. We would take pride to give a coffee table book to Mr. Thiruppugazh IAS. Our original history, 150th history, was written by Tirumala IAS, and this was written by historian Sriram, who will also be addressing tomorrow. Thank you so very much. Now over to you, Mr. Venkat.
A very good morning. If you love your children, there would be no disasters. And seeing is acting. Both started and ended with a Jiddu Krishnamurti quote. And being from a Jiddu Krishnamurti school, I really appreciate Dr. Thiruppugazh's entire Valley School. So, I mean, it was really an amazing presentation, and I've been in the Ahmedabad earthquake, and I could really see the amount of work that has been done, and I came to know today that he was part of it. An amazing work that was done post the earthquake. Excellent definitions. In fact, the blueprint for inaction, I mean, that's something which really defines us all. And the definitions of disaster, whether it is the socio-cultural aspects of disaster, and then he actually told us about whether it is a natural or man-made. Most of it is man-made. I mean, natural is not really a term that we should be looking at. And then he really took us through understanding risk. And I really loved each one of those slides and the pictures that were associated with the slides and the captions along with them. Brilliant presentation, Dr. Thiruppugazh. I mean, really loved it. Now, global warming makes us require to have air conditioners, and air conditioners actually in turn create global warming. And we are trying to reach this magical figure of 1.5 degrees by 2050. So Madras Chamber was looking for a speaker who has been through the COP28, and Dr. Nambi Appadurai has done a wonderful job as taking us through what actually happened there. I mean, otherwise we get sketchy reports from the newspapers. I mean, he talked about the loss and damage fund. That was the first thing that I was looking for. Okay, there's a small 770 million, which is less than 2% of the requirement. Now, I'm glad at least some people have started opening their purse strings, and I hope they loosen it a lot further. He talked of adaptation and mitigation, how important they are. I mean, how much funds are actually required for adaptation, not just mitigation alone. And then the global stock take, the nationally determined contributions, how it is basically back of the envelope thing that is given, but okay, that's a good start to start with. Then, of course, the landmark achievement, we were talking about the fossil fuels, the phase out and phase down. Let's really look at phase out in time to come. I know some countries are opposed to this particular aspect of fossil fuel phasing out, really speaking. Then Mr. Keshavan, he talked about the quantum, he gave a very different perspective, quantum theory itself, the relationality and interdependence of various aspects of nature. I mean, any disturbance, really speaking, increases the quantum of the problem, and we need quantum jumps to take us out of this. We need really a holistic approach, basically a quantum approach to entire problem solving of national disasters. And of course, I would thank MCCI, basically, during such a time when we're just 1 week away from a disaster, they had a real tough time getting the entire thing organized because many people were opting out and so on and so forth. But more than anything, I would congratulate them for organizing the best of speakers for the inaugural and for the sessions to follow. Now, looking at the sponsors, we've had some excellent sponsors, the platinum sponsors being Kaveri Hospitals, Ruhr Pumpen India Private Limited, and Orient Green Power. The gold sponsors are Danfoss Industries, Saint-Gobain, Sri City Private Limited, Sundaram Finance, Tafe, Water Today, ZF Commercial Vehicle Control Systems India Private Limited. And last but not the least, let's hope this conference helps us achieve better climatic conditions and not climactic conditions. Thank you.